Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Defion Productions podcast. I am your host, the hardest working nobody in Bitcoin, Don. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and today is Hal Finney Day. This is the anniversary of Hal Finney's passing, August 28th, 2014. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some other stories. We're going to talk price action, everything Bitcoin. Really quick before we get into all of that, I do want to talk about this past weekend. We had the Emerge-a-thon. Thank you to anybody that normally watches our podcast that tuned in. We did film our 100th episode during the Emerge-a-thon podcast around 3 o'clock on Saturday. You can go to the Emerge_Creators website to take a look at that if you'd like to see that and all the other content that we filmed. I'm going to get into the charts real quick here. We got currently... We got the price of Bitcoin at $112,354.77. Total market cap of $2.37 trillion. Ethereum sitting slightly under 4,500 at 4,480. $540 billion market cap. Fear and Greed Index at 45. Total market cap of crypto 3.89 trillion. We've had a lot of price action. Obviously, last week we hit the all-time high with Bitcoin, and then it came down. We had a wick down to about 108. Ethereum also hit an all-time high right around 4,900 depending on what exchange you looked at. That's come down as well. So those are kind of like hanging out between Ethereum's about, let's say, 10% off its all-time high. Bitcoin is about 12-13% off its all-time high. They both seem to be just kind of hanging out there. The rest of the market, if you look at the action from the last 7 days, Bitcoin completely flat, barely down. ETH is still up almost 5%. XRP 2.2. Solana's up 16.3. So it looks like altcoins are starting to move slightly while Bitcoin and Ethereum kind of trade sideways. Kind of natural in a bull market. It's kind of what you expect. It's kind of what we get. Taking a look at dominance, we got a Bitcoin dominance of 57.6%. I saw it as low as 55 this week. So the dominance going up slightly. ETH at 14.8. It's basically double where it was for most of this bull run. So you kind of got things going choppy. That's, for the altcoiners, and God bless the altcoiners, they want this choppiness because that will give these shit coins an opportunity to run while Bitcoin and Ethereum take a little cool off. The money comes out of there theoretically and goes into the shit coins and then rotates back into Bitcoin, and then we get that parabolic top. Here we are in the end of August, September being a couple of days away. I saw a stat the other day that September is the only month of all the months that's actually red all time on average. Every other month, all 11 months are green on average throughout the 4-year cycles. But September has been historically a red month. So if things play out how they normally do, you can kind of expect that we'll probably see continued correction in September, which is normal. It usually happens even in the parabolic runs. You get that correction in September, and then October, you get that parabolic run that usually happens between 11 and 20 days. Things pop off. And then you get Ethereum and the altcoins that kind of run in October and November before things cool off completely and everything. And we enter into that bear market. So it looks like we could be kind of trending towards that potentially. Things are kind of setting up. I still think I'm about 50-50 that, I've been about 75-25, but I'm about 50-50 that we're going to get that 4-year cycle that we normally get. I still think there's a chance that we stay choppy through the rest of the year, and then we still go up in 2026, which would obviously break the 4-year cycle. And then there's that 50% chance that things just kind of play out as they always have, even though we have the institutional adoption here, that retail does end up coming in, sending us on a parabolic run and seeing Bitcoin top, Ethereum top, altcoins top, and then us going into a traditional 1-year bear market that typically happens in the midterms of the traditional elections. if that happens, if we are in the 4-year cycle, I do believe strongly that we probably won't see a 75 or 80% correction in Bitcoin because of all the institutional adoption that we have, both holding and acquiring through ETFs, the Bitcoin treasury companies and such. And just the big time players that are here this cycle that haven't been here previously. I just don't see the liquidity drying out and the price going down 75% or so. We'll go into our next article here. Hal Finney. Hal Finney passed away 11 years ago. For those of you that are unaware of who Hal Finney is, Hal Finney was the individual who got the first transaction from Satoshi, that first block in January 3rd of 2009. Satoshi sent Hal Finney the first transaction. Selfishly, myself, I believe Hal Finney is most likely probably Satoshi. That's my thoughts, being that Satoshi's coins haven't moved, and all the legend around that, the fact that he died in 2014, caught ALS, suffered for a year or two before actually passing away. So that it kind of lines up and makes sense that the coin's not moving and everything that kind of happened in 12 and 13, and Satoshi walking away, looking for, he said, I'm going to concentrate on other things. It could have been his health, which I believe was the case with Hal Finney. August 28, 2014, 11 years. Like I said, I believe that Hal is Satoshi, or was Satoshi. There's a lot of data, I think, that backs that up. And for those that aren't familiar with the family, there was a good podcast that was done, I think, 2 years ago on what Bitcoin did, where Hal Finney's wife was interviewed, and she talked about the death threats and the extortion attempts that were made on her and her family during that 2017-2018 bull run, after Hal had already passed, and people were assuming that potentially he was a Satoshi, or her and her family had a large stockpile of Bitcoin, and they were trying to extort that family. And it's just sad that things like that happen. But like I said, there was a What Bitcoin Did podcast that was in 2023 or 2024, where Hal Finney's wife, and she rarely does any interviews, was interviewed, and it was a very good interview to kind of talk about some of the dark side of this ecosystem, unfortunately, and some of the negatives that occur. I want to show this real quick because this is going to help us have a greater conversation. Hopefully, me and you, Rich. This will be the first time you probably see it. Dave Smith was interviewed a while back by Joe Rogan, and this is a really good 2 minute 30-second clip from the podcast where Dave kind of talks about taxation, talks about the 20-year wars, and we've had this conversation prior, but we're gonna revisit it and kind of talk about like our views on what Dave brings up.
5 years, we've spent close to $10 trillion on wars, and they didn't tax the American people for that, because they knew they couldn't tax us enough to pay. We would put an end to it. If they tried to raise everybody's taxes enough to come up with $10 trillion because we want to go fight regime change wars all over the Middle East, the American people would have been like, no, we're not doing that. But they didn't do that. They kept taxes where they were. I think they even cut some rates during those years, top rates. And then they borrowed the rest, and they still couldn't borrow enough, so they just print the money. And then essentially what happens is that the price of everything just goes up and up and up. And you just put more money into the system, and then people start looking around and going like, geez, why is the price of housing and healthcare and energy and childcare totally unaffordable? And the answer is because you're paying for the war in Iraq. And nobody thinks about it like that. But that's really what's going on. They can't. So for all the young people who are coming out of college now, and they're like, I'm 150 grand in debt, I have a gender studies major degree or whatever, maybe something better than that, but they got an English degree or something, and they're working at DoorDash, and the average house is going for 600 grand, and they're like, what am I possibly going to do? It's like the reason why these kids are all demanding socialism, at least on the left, is because, like, what else are you going to do? Like, how do you even... But the reason why that is the case is because your government decided to spend trillions of dollars on blowing up brown countries, and in some cases then rebuilding them to blow them up again. I mean, this is the actual cost of the thing. And I feel like it's almost nobody outside of like the Ron Paul libertarians, the Austrian economics guys, almost nobody else ever makes this connection. That it's like, this is the deal. You can't be a world empire without having a central bank that can print money for you, because otherwise it just doesn't work. Resources are finite and you'll run out of them. And so you can't do that without having this monetary system. But the cost of this monetary system is that prices always go up and up and up and up, and that rigs the entire economy against the working class and the middle class in favor of the rich. It's just the way it is. When the value of assets is going up and up and up and up, that's great if you own stuff. That's great if you own stuff and you're selling it. If you got $1 billion in the bank, inflation is your best friend. But if you're on a fixed income or you're a working class person, it just destroys you.
A couple of things. The first thing is I want to point out the complete misunderstanding that most people have in regards to those 20-year wars. You'll hear the argument often made that, they wasted taxpayer money by fighting the war in Iraq and fighting the war in Afghanistan. And as you heard Dave point out, which is the factual case, they weren't spending taxpayer money. It was not taxpayer money, and nor would the taxpayer have signed off on doing that. They were printing dollars to fight that war. They were taking the taxpayer money that they were getting from people and using it on whatever they would use it on here and mismanaging it here. The money that was being sent overseas to fight those wars was not coming in from tax receipts. We wouldn't have been able to fund that. There wasn't enough money coming in to do both taking care of our obligations and responsibilities here and fighting those wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So what most people miss when they make that argument and they're like, oh, they're wasting taxpayer, they're sending my money to, and even today when we talk about Ukraine or we talk about Israel and they talk about like, when we're sending money or we're sending weapons or we're doing things overseas, none of that is taxpayer money. That is them pushing buttons and the central bank printing money that did not exist and sending that over. And the after effects of that is being felt here. That's when you see the prices of goods and services continuing to rise. That's when you see you go to the grocery store and things are going up. That's when you when you realize that wages aren't keeping up with the price of all the things that you normally buy. And you're like, what the hell is going on? And you're thinking, oh, it's because they're sending my taxpayer dollars over there. It's like, no, they're not. They're not sending taxpayer dollars over there. It's even worse than that. They're creating money out of thin air, which makes the money that you're making while that war is happening buy less and less. That's the problem. Rich, what did you think of when you saw that clip and the greater point that I'm driving home?
Well, we've talked about that, and it was obviously he was much more concise than I've ever been. But no, he's right, and I thought that was like spot on. And he actually really dove into it, even made it as a direct connection to things. And it's funny because then I thought about it, I'm like, I wondered if, like, you think about how much money the federal government brings in every year, and then you compared it to the rest of the annual budget besides the cost of a war. I wonder, like, how close we would be to breaking even, you know what I mean, if we weren't, like, doing this on a regular basis. And we've been doing it now, I mean, obviously since before, but we've been doing, like, major stuff since, like, 91, since the first Iraq war. I mean, specifically where... there was always still things that we did, but really I feel like we've been in these wars since like 91, 92.
Yeah, there is no breaking even because we have such a large deficit now and such a huge debt.
No, I meant if you took the wars out of it, if you just took the wars out of it, if we weren't doing all of that, if we brought in $100, how much of the federal government, like the $100 we bring in, whatever that number is, the 100% that we bring in from taxes every year. You take that, you put this here, and then you put everything, take the war stuff out. What's left over in the federal government? I love how close we would be to balancing the budget. Like, I wonder if where we were, because obviously, even when Clinton was president, and we did have the one balanced budget in that time frame. The only thing really going on was the stuff going on in Kosovo, and it was post Soviet Union collapse, and we had that type of stuff. But there wasn't really we were doing peacekeeping stuff, but we weren't actively. There was all those rules of engagement at the time. It was a really different time in our military history, and I'm sure that cost us money. But they were being more of a police force. They weren't actively in combat. And that they were really trying to whatever. But it'd be funny if you took out, you said, he said, they pay for everything. We just keep printing. Crazy.
Well, the reason why the scary secret, the scary reasoning why we're doing it is because, and Dave talked about it in that clip, it inflates assets. It inflates asset prices.
Yep.
When you're printing money, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and the middle class gets squeezed. Because if you own assets, it's great for you. Like you said, if you got $1 billion in the bank, and I think that's, you obviously don't have it in the bank, but you have $1 billion worth of assets, and we're printing money to infinity, then the asset prices just keep going up. Inflation doesn't affect you. If you're wealthy, if your net worth is 5 million plus, you root for inflation. Inflation is a good thing. You don't want it to go away. But if you're on a fixed income or you're struggling in the middle class, inflation is eroding away your buying power, which makes the ability to even acquire assets, because you don't have any excess residual cash to use to buy any assets, even harder.
About their house got reassessed and how much the house was, how proud they are of the value of their house. Have you ever had that? People come up to you, and I'm like, you don't want that. You don't want your house to be, unless you're planning on selling it tomorrow. You don't want your house to be assessed high, because that means they're just going to raise your property values. Your property taxes. Why do you? I want my assessment to be as low as possible. I don't want to pay taxes on a $300,000 house if it's really evaluated at. And that's what we do. This in municipalities all over this country, where they'll just reassess the properties. And then that way they can it's a tax increase, but it's not real. They don't. Well, we didn't change the rate. We didn't change the rate. The rate's the same. Yeah, but you went and decided that every house on B Street is worth $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 more than it was last year. So it's a tax increase because you decided what the measure of an assessment was. And we do that across the country. We do it, because obviously cities have to, they have to figure out a way to live within their means. They can't have a deficit spending, so to speak. But it's funny when and that was the other thing I wanted to mention was it's funny, again, I mentioned this several weeks ago. I watched the John Adams miniseries. It was on HBO 10 years ago. And they were talking about, John Adams was understanding when he was talking to the English ambassador about, it was the French ambassador, about the United States needed to have debt to establish credit so that they could fund their wars. I don't know how accurate it was for the time, but in 2016, they worked it into John Adams. I don't know if it's based on his writings or just the writer's thing. And the other thing I was thinking about that came up was in Game of Thrones, when they had to go to the gold company or whatever it was to get money so they could fund the war. And I found it really amusing that we see all this stuff in our popular culture on a regular basis, but people aren't paying attention.
No, they're asleep at the wheel. You made a good transition for this next video that I'm going to show, talking about housing. There's an article here that I got that I'm going to play a 3-minute, 28-second clip of. The Fed can't rescue this in its entirety. You've got 4 million homes in Texas and 42 million across the U.S. at risk of bankruptcy or losing the roof over their heads. That's nearly 38% of households. The money to pay these bonds doesn't exist. You can't get blood out of a stone. When school bond debt and inflated appraisals collide, even the Federal Reserve may be powerless. So let's listen to this clip. You were actually talking about some of this while I was going to it was wild because I had this up ready and you were talking about school taxes and stuff, and he talks about it in this video. So let's watch this real quick.
Humpty Dumpty can't be put back together again. That's the point of this. So, to your point, can the Federal Reserve rescue this? In its entirety, no. As a portion of it, that's up to them to figure out how to do. All I know is you've got to get these real estate taxes off the back of mom and pop, all property owners, and restore their balance sheet. So no person in the United States signed any document anywhere that says, I agree to go bankrupt for the sake of my school district. That's never happened. Well, do you realize that in the state of Texas, you've got 4 million houses in harm's way of bankruptcy and or losing the roof over their head? Across the United States, it's 42 million. That's the equivalent of roughly 37.8% of the household population going bankrupt or losing the roof over their head. You cannot get blood out of a stone. Nobody can. The money to pay these bonds doesn't exist.
If there's no rescue, are we talking then default?
You have a friend, Mr. Justra, and he's 100% right, except it's worse. Mr. Salente is 100% right, except it's worse. As far as I can tell, what needs to occur on the bonds, and this is where the spider web gets really off the chart. The bonds themselves, you say, well, we have a face value of the bonds and the bonds are trackable. Yeah, no, they're not. And here's why. Under federal law, banks are required to hold 60% of their reserves in bonds. So if you think about it, who has the ability, but for the SEC, to walk in under subpoena power and start tracing back the QSIPs? And the QSIPs are the bond numbers of when the bond was issued, how much was issued, et cetera, et cetera. We tried. We even tried under Freedom of Information. Jeff Mashburn tried. It got to the point where even Ken Paxton himself wrote a letter, that's the Attorney General of the state of Texas, wrote a letter to the Itasca School District and said, turn it over. And the Itasca School District told him to stuff it. Well, if you can't find the QSIPs and you can't track it but for the SEC and but for subpoena power, think of how bad this is. What banks are sitting on these outstanding bonds? What underwriters sold these outstanding bonds? When you start tracking the history of the spider web and see how big it's gotten, this is the one reason why I believe at the tail end, not only the SEC and the FBI and the DOJ, they're going to have to go to the Federal Reserve and they're going to have to craft something, somehow, to contain the damage, i.e. controlled demolition. If you let this go on its own, heaven help all of us.
Wow. Mitch, I know we threw a lot at people right now, but if I'm hearing you correctly, you're talking something much worse than '08.
08 will literally seem like a walk in Central Park. It'll be a non-existent blip. Humpty.
It's my personal belief that we're being lied to about what's happening in housing. I see so many conflicting reports all the time on social media about how bad or how bad it's not in regards to like what's going on in housing. I don't think you have to be like a rocket scientist or a super smart economist to see that what happened in 2020 when they just printed money to infinity and what home prices did in a short period of time and where interest rates have gyrated and gone from 2019 until today and in between, to know that there's a lot of people that are in bad spots owning homes. Like, I don't think you need to be an economist to recognize that something was probably broken in the last 5 years. It starts out like what you talked about, right? You have two problems. The first problem is the people that bought homes in 2022, 2023, when interest rates went up from under 3% to people getting it at 7 or 8%, depending on your credit rating. And, simultaneously home prices doubling or tripling. So you have a double or triple price that you're paying, sticker price, on top of double or triple interest rate that you're paying. That's never a good combination. And then the people that do have homes that are at a lower rate, like I'll take myself, for example. I bought a house in 2021 and I got a 2.99 interest rate. But here's the thing. My mortgage is going up every single year. You know why? Because I have my property taxes and school taxes escrowed into my mortgage. So every single year I'm paying more and more money. Now it's not gotten to a point where it's kind of crazy, but can you imagine the homes that are living on such a fixed, tight budget where they bought a house and now, they might have a manageable payment, but now their taxes are going up at such a high rate that it's causing them to potentially lose a house that they're actually able to pay the mortgage on, but they can't afford the taxes because the taxes are going up so much. And then on the flip side, you got all the people that bought the house in the 2022, 2023 that paid 3x sticker price and are paying 7% mortgages, and they're just, and the price, everything's going up because we keep printing money, and they're just, it's you can imagine what's coiling up in the housing market. And here's the thing, they don't want people to panic, because look what happened in 08, right? You had rumblings in 06 and 07. If you remember, there were rumblings in 06 and 07.
I remember in 06, 07 not knowing what I remember them talking about Fannie Mae and
Freddie Mac.
I remember like there were a couple Democratic congressional guys that had kind of crafted policy, and the Republicans were involved too, but they crafted this policy that they were like, loan the money, loan the money, loan the money. They kind of regulated the banks and told the banks to loan the money, and the banks were fine with it. But then, and it was almost like they created this fake bubble in the value of housing. And then all of a sudden, everybody in the world that I knew in that time frame was bragging about how much they bought their house for $11 and now it was worth $13 trillion. And they were all financial geniuses. And everybody was like, those people that we knew that were day traders at home too. They didn't need a real job because they knew they had figured out the stock market all by themselves, like just on a website. And I kept looking at them like, this doesn't make any sense. There's no way this is sustainable. Then the crash came, and literally people were like, I'm just not paying my mortgage anymore. This is going to be worse if that guy is 80% right. The funny thing about it is, like, they won't be able to process that much in the way of bankruptcies. They're going to have to negotiate because there's no way they can handle all those bankruptcies, because what will happen is some of these people, this will be their second, maybe even third, but they're at least another bankruptcy, someone that was able to fix everything that happened to them in 08, overpaid for a house in 2022, 2023, when they finally got out of bankruptcy and their credit was back to normal, and here they go again. And most of these people now are probably 50. Like we talked about a few years ago, what are we going to do when my wife retires in 3 years? What are we going to do? And I'm like, we're not doing anything. Like, we've decided, like, yes, we still have property taxes, but will not have any other debt when my wife retires, besides, maybe a little bit of, home equity loan or something, but no real debt, because then it's like but we're not selling this house and trying to downsize because it's going to cost me more to downsize. Like, so downsizing is only good if you can find a house that's small enough that you can save enough money to make it worth it. I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. I don't think downsizing is going to be an option for most people. It's going to be like, what's it called? Rent control.
Here's the thing. You have housing in real estate that has gone from being a place to reside, which is a utility, to being something that somebody uses for a monetary aspect in storing value. Okay. Somewhere along the way, people went from, it's not just buying big buildings and commercial real estate and investing in that, to buying places that you're residing in, that you're not even renting, that is storing your value. Right. Homes were not meant for that. Homes were meant to reside. The utility was the fact that you had a place to live. Okay. Let's talk about gold real quick, because I'm making a point. Gold was created for people to show off wealth, and people would wear it, and people would trade it. But the utility was in the fact that you can make things with gold. Same thing with silver. Same thing with all these other things, right? All these value stores have utility. Bitcoin is the first thing created where the monetary aspect is the utility. people are always like, well, Bitcoin has no utility. Like they'll tell you like Ethereum's utility is its supercomputer. Solana's utility is its NFTs. And you'll hear all these utility bullshit nonsense conversations. And it's that ridiculous mindset because gold's utility was, wearing and showing, and then ended up being a store of value. We realized that we could hold on to that. Homes and real estate's utility was living in it, and then we realized we want to store value in it. Bitcoin is the first monetary asset where the actual utility is the monetary asset aspect of it. There's nothing else. You don't wear it. You don't store it. You just hold it and store value in it. It is the monetary aspect is the utility. That's the utility. Where all these other things that we've chosen to be value stores have other aspects of utility. And look at housing. In 2008, we had a huge crash because of what happened when people were buying homes and getting the ninja loans, no income, no assets, and getting multiple properties and, making money hand over fist, and then that blew up. And did we learn our lesson? No, look where we're at less than 2 decades later. We're right in another spot where it's getting ready to happen again because homes are meant the utility to live in, to reside in, to not be homeless. But we're using it again as a store of value, and it's just not really meant for that. It's not meant for every single person that owns a property to use it as a utility asset of monetary use. It's just not meant for that. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just no surprise, absolutely no surprise if in the next couple of years we see another housing crash. And, no, go ahead. Go.
How far away do you think we are? I mean, not that you're financial, you're not claiming, I'm not asking you to make a prediction like you can. Are we 2 years away? Are we 5 years away? When do you, based on the, I know you're not like looking at the tea leaves and, doing graphs, but when are we 2 years away? Are we 5 years away? Where are we on this?
It's all going to depend on how quickly and efficiently the people that are the most exposed, that are the most important, are able to get away and get outside of the exposure of it affecting them and it shifting it to the middle class again. You know what I'm saying? Like BlackRock owns a ton of real estate. It's just in these banks that have these bonds and these that's why you hear Trump, in my opinion, that's why you hear Trump yelling so loud to lower these interest rates, because they want to refinance debt to get these banks out from under these shitty bets and investments that they made in 2022 and 2021 to try to fix balance sheets. So then when the things do fall off a cliff, these banks that are too big to fail and these individuals that are too big to fail are safe, and they're in a spot where they're covered, and the only people that get hurt are the American people again, and we take the brunt of it. So I think you're going to have to wait and see what happens with the Fed. So, Powell's leaving in May. Not even to mention the stuff that's going on with the one Fed chair that is committing mortgage fraud, apparently, and Trump tried to fire her. That's a whole nother conversation, whether he can do that constitutionally or not. But just the fact that there's a claim being made that one of the Federal Reserve governors filled out an application that could potentially be a felony because it was a crime. She lied, committed fraud on a mortgage. That's somebody that's literally making monetary policy for our country, committing fraud on a mortgage application, which is just wild. But I think, to answer the question, the long and the short of it is, it all depends on what happens with the rates, and all depends on how quickly the people that matter the most can shield themselves from the most harm. And once they do that, then I think that's when the house of cards come crashing down. Because I just think it's inevitable.
The conspiracy part of my brain is there's a fair amount of people in this country, and they're on both sides of this fence, that kind of want housing to become corporate. They want everybody to basically not own as many homes and have to rent, and essentially like you never really own your home. It's going to just the concept of that American dream of the home. You own a home. Most people will have to essentially rent a house or an apartment, and because there's not enough houses being built. That's for sure. So, and I actually saw a podcast where they asked one of these women, I forget the woman's name now. They asked her, like, what are you doing to address the shortage in property? And the woman said, like, there was the six-story building in a city that was being built, and they asked her like, the interviewer asked her, how are you addressing the housing shortage in this city? And she said, well, we took a 6-story building and we decided to make it only 3, and we expanded the parking lot and the grounds. So basically they had this larger thing that was supposed to actually have more units that would have been cheaper, and they purposely she pushed it to condense the property to basically make it more expensive. And it's like, but you were asked the exact opposite question. What are you doing to address the property shortage in these big cities and stuff? And it's almost like, I think they almost want it to collapse, in my mind, so that corporations can just swoop in and buy all these houses on pennies on the dollar, and pretty much you don't own a house anymore. You're just renting a house from a corporation, and they just continue to get richer and richer and richer and richer, and you just live check to check. And that's kind of what I think a lot of these companies want, and I think the government kind of likes it.
How about this scenario? Let's say somebody bought a house in 1975, and they paid a 30-year mortgage on the house. Paid it off in, what would it be, 2005 would be 30 years,
yep.
Right? And let's say they still live in the house. There's a higher than likely chance that today, per year, they're paying more living in that house than they did when they got the house for that first mortgage.
Oh, for sure, because of just property taxes.
So whatever that mortgage was,
my parents' house. My mom still lives in my dad's house that my mom and dad bought in 1962.
Good example.
So my dad, they've lived in that house since 1960. I was 65. So they bought the house where they live in, our city in 1965. So now what is that? 40, 50 years?
That would be 60.
60 years. They've been in the house for 60 years. And
two 30-year mortgages.
It's been paid off. I want to say it's been paid off probably since the 90s. So even with the fact that it's paid off, when you just look at property taxes, and in the city where we live, the property taxes are high, but they're not astronomical compared to other places. The city can't raise them anymore. There's no way they could raise them significantly more. But you're right. I guarantee you, whatever my mother's tax bill is
higher than
what it was in 1960, and probably even I would say, if we looked at maybe 1990, something like that. Let's not even go back to the 60s because that's so far long ago. But I bet you right now, if you took whatever my dad's mortgage payment was in the early 90s before he finished paying off the house, and then added the escrow at the time, even throw in property insurance too, and then compare it to now, my mom's paying more now, just on property taxes and house insurance.
I do know a childhood friend of mine who family bought their house in 79. And when they were done paying the mortgage, I remember that they told me that they had made their last mortgage payment. And at the time, the mortgage payment was like $222.
Right.
And that was just, they were done paying the $222. And I know where they live at, and I know what the taxes are. And I can tell you that it's double with school and property taxes. They're paying on average over $400 a month just in taxes right now,
right,
to live in that same house that in 1979 it only cost $200 to pay a mortgage on.
Right.
So the complete lie that we're told is that buy a home so you can own a property, and there's nothing better than owning your property. You never own it.
Right.
You are renting from your municipality, your school district, on top of your local government. You're perpetually just renting. And the fact that you can buy a house in 1965 or 1979 and pay double or more today than what you did back then is just wild to think that that's that you buy a house because you're like, oh, I'm going to pay this off one day and my bills are going to be less. And it's like, no. And why is that? Because the money's broken, right? The $200 a month that they were paying for the mortgage in 1979 was probably equivalent to about $1,200 or $1,300 a month today.
Yeah, I'd have
It bought way more back then than it buys today.
I was trying to think about that. Like my house, my first mortgage payment, not counting escrow, I think my first mortgage payment when I bought my house in '92 was like $455, and the interest rates were really high at that time. Interest rates in the early '90s were like 8% or something.
Yeah,
kind of about what they are now. And I'd put down not a lot, but I put down. I think it was a 90. I think my first house was 96,000. You couldn't find it 96,000, and that was a 4-bedroom house, 1,800 square feet, a pretty good sized lot, and again for $455. And we've talked about this 100 times on this content. I've listened to you and I've joined in now that we, the what I made in '90 as a new teacher versus what a new teacher's making now has not tripled like the price of or 2.5 times the price of the house.
No.
A starter house, I wouldn't even call that a starter house. I think most of my friends who bought starter houses in the 90s probably spent maybe $75
maybe
on
less,
their house.
even less.
Maybe even less for their first starter home.
Yeah.
Again, the interest rates would have been about 90, the people in the 90s. And that's a starter house now in our community, forget about nationally, would be what? 200,000 at least.
You're not getting anything less than
but
200.
your salary hasn't tripled. Starting salaries in those same professions have not tripled.
No. And that's the problem. That is the problem. That is what we're fighting against. That's why this podcast exists. That's why Bitcoin exists. And that's the greater conversation. And people that don't own Bitcoin and they're so skeptical of Bitcoin don't even understand what's happening in front of their eyes. Like they don't understand the system that they engage in on a daily basis in what's happening to them. Some of them recognize it and can feel it, but can't really put it into words. But it's like when they talk about Bitcoin as being, volatile or Bitcoin being like too risky, it's like there's nothing on this planet riskier than fiat currency. The risk that you take going to get a fiat job and trying to make it work in a 30-year, 40-year working span while you're getting hit with all the things that the government hits you with, taking away your buying power, just eroding it away. That's the risk. That's the real risk.
Well, again, compare I'm trying to think. So I'm going to compare my father from when he bought his house in 65, whatever it was, to the next 30 years. The 30 years span when he was working, raising his family, versus me buying my house 30 years working and raising my family. And I can count 3 financial crises in that 30 years. I think the only one my dad would have in that same time, in his time frame, would have been the energy crisis of
the 70s.
I remember
Which
that. I remember
with,
to this day my father going through his silver coin collection and just trying to figure out what it was worth. He had all these. My dad had collected silver coins,
sure.
All those nickels and everything. And eventually, when my father passed away, that was given to one of my brothers. My brother, that was what he got. So I remember, and my brother didn't. I don't know if he ever cashed in or what he did with it because that was not mine. But I remember not understanding, and that would have been I probably was 8 or 9, and all I remember was sitting there with my father at the kitchen table and helping him stack nickels or whatever the heck we were doing, the silver dollars and all that stuff. And I don't know if I think he's just trying to get a sense of, because I'm sure things were tight. Things must have been tight, but not tight like they are now. But that's the only real financial crisis, right? There was a recession when Reagan, right? And
Reagan came in at the
kind of at the end of the Carter, which was again, but the end of the Carter administration was a direct reflection on what was happening with the energy crisis, obviously the Nixon controversy, that led to Reagan, which led to Reaganomics. So maybe there was that recession in there under Reagan's first administration, but I don't think that affected us like any financial crisis that I've had 3 of them now in my adult lifetime.
Yeah.
And obviously we know that's got a lot of it's got to do with fiat.
Let's take a look at this post here. This kind of drives the point home of what we're talking about. Foreign central banks now officially hold more gold than U.S. treasuries for the first time since 1996. Let that sink in. If you think this buying streak is ending, just look at what happened in the 1970s. This is likely the beginning of one of the most significant global rebalancing we've experienced in recent history. So if you take a look, gold holdings, U.S. Treasury holdings, and right around, if you look at the 70s, gold was high, obviously, because we were on the gold standard. And then getting off the gold standard, it starts to plummet. And then U.S. Treasuries go up because we're on a fiat standard. And then from 96 all the way until the present, it was way more U.S. Treasuries than gold. And it's just been on a collision course where it's gone in the other direction now. And that's just because, like, we're like, the world is recognizing, like, the U.S. dollar is trash. And every other currency is worse than the U.S. dollar. So just holding fiat is trash. So these banks, these central banks are holding, gold, which I believe at some point in the future, it's going to switch to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is just the digital gold 2.0. But the fact that they're not holding treasuries anymore, which means that they're not holding dollars, is huge. It's just huge.
Yeah, I think I'm just pulling up a chart, just looking at my own curiosity. I like to look stuff up sometimes when you're talking. And I'm looking at the value of the U.S. dollar chart, and it's, like, I'm just comparing it to the euro. And, it's like the euro, it's 0.86 versus in, we were over, 1, going back to 23. So, I mean, if you look at the chart from 23, the value, even just against the euro, and not even on its own, just comparing it to where we are with other things, the value's just not there. And it's funny because all these guys are like, yeah, and I just can't believe, because somebody says it on a tweet or a press, they just believe it. Oh, he said that it's going up. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Don't trust, verify. Like, seriously, like, why would you believe that? Do your own research. And, like, I mean, like, just because somebody says it doesn't mean it's true. Look it up. Compare it. Like, inform yourself. And this is the funny thing about this podcast, because once in a while, it's, the same way you and I have joked about, like, everybody has a podcast. Well, this Bitcoin's or whatever, like, that we compare about that. But it's funny. I'm like, even if you don't think Bitcoin's your answer, let's say some guy's like, I get what you're saying, but it's not Bitcoin. Okay, but at least he maybe gets what you're saying and he's doing something. So if you're not going to do Bitcoin, fine. Do something else. Better be aware of what you've been talking about for now 100 episodes.
Look at this next article that coincides with the last one. U.S. Treasury just bought back another $1.4 billion of its own debt. This is now a total of $7.4 billion.
I don't even understand how that works.
In the last 2 weeks.
I don't even understand how that works.
Here's a good comment underneath. If we take a look at this right here. Let's be clear, this isn't business as usual. Liquidity stress is showing when the issuer of the world's reserve asset has to step in and backstop demand. It signals cracks in the system. Stealth QE is underway. They can dress it up as the market functioning operations, but the reality is simple. The Treasury is absorbing supply because the market can't. Debt spiral mechanics, 35 trillion, it's actually 37 trillion plus in debt, rising issuance, shrinking natural buyers. This is now, again, these other countries are not buying our treasuries. So if the other countries are not buying our treasuries, we have to buy our own shit to keep the liquidity into the system. Because normally, you saw since 96, the other countries are buying and providing liquidity. They've stopped. So now we have to buy our own shit, which means we have to provide more treasuries to buy more debt, and the spiral just continues. What does this mean? Risk assets smell blood. Every dollar of stealth liquidity leaks into equities and crypto. Bonds aren't safe havens. They're being artificially propped up. The Fed and Treasury tag team is back, whether they want to admit it or not. Translation: they're bailing water out of a sinking ship, and the liquidity tide is flowing into Ethereum, Bitcoin, gold, and hard assets. You either front run the flood or you drown in it. That's the huge point that people need to understand. When all this stuff, and you asked me like earlier, like, when do I think everything cracks? Like, they have to reposition themselves. So they're going to reposition themselves in the things that they find that the money is going to flow into. And it's not going to be real estate because real estate's going to collapse. So it's going to be hard assets. It's going to be probably gold. It's going to be Bitcoin. It's going to be, unfortunately, some of these other Ethereum and shit coins. But it's going to be like they're going to flood the system with liquidity to backstop stuff. And all that stuff is going to go into assets because you can't hold dollars. You can't hold what's continually buying you less and less. Like that ideology of people like putting money under the mattress and just cash is king, like that shit is dead. Like if you're living by that ideology, you're in trouble. You should not have money. You should not have large amount of money in the bank. You got to put that into something. If you're just holding it in the bank, you're going to be in trouble because it's buying less and less. Every $1,000 you have sitting in the bank every month is buying you less and less. Now, again, I'm not saying you should have nothing. You should definitely be prepared in case an emergency hits. Give yourself some liquidity. You should definitely have a little bit of cash. Like I'm not saying you have no cash, but to have like 200 grand sitting in the bank is just like astronomically ridiculous. And that's why you see these companies that are becoming Bitcoin treasury companies. If you have a company that has $100 million on their balance sheet, they're not buying treasuries, which they used to buy. They're not buying bonds, which they used to buy. You got Michael Saylor where the light bulb went off and he's like, I'm going to buy Bitcoin. And now you have these Bitcoin treasury companies and you have these Ethereum treasury companies popping up, which I don't agree with, but I do agree with the ideology that I'm not going to buy shitty ass bonds and shitty ass treasuries because if a foreign government doesn't want it and the government's got to buy it, I damn sure not going to put my heart and soul of my company's value into that.
And rich people have understood that for years. They never keep liquid money in their bank accounts. It's always invested into something, whether it was real estate or property or art, or they buy a stake in the Buffalo Bills. Whatever it is, they're going to put it into something. Because even let's just say you invest in, let's assume the guy plays Deadpool, right? Got all this money. His buddy comes to him. He's like, you should invest in that soccer team.
Ryan Reynolds.
Right, Ryan Reynolds, like Rexford. So did he do it because he suddenly likes soccer? No, he's like it was a good content investment because he certainly got content out of it. Yep. But it was also like it was a financial. I need to do something with this money somewhere where I can invest in something. And that's what most people with a little bit of money do. And that's kind of but the one thing that you brought up about 5 minutes ago that I verified the number because everybody talks about, like the American dollar and cash is American dollar is the strongest and blah, 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 blah. But the investment since the beginning of 2025, foreign investment in the United States is down by 35%.
Yep.
They are not investing in the United States. Foreign dollars are not trickling into the United States anymore. It's down by over a third. And I don't know if it's because of politics or if it's the dollar. It's probably a little bit of both. But either way, the reason why we've been strong as a country is because everybody wanted a piece of the American pie. And people are like, you know what? I'm going to invest in the Chinese pie because I may not like Chinese food, but that pie looks pretty good right now, whether it's some other country, whatever it is, they're not looking here. They're looking at other options. And like, I don't know what, like if Belgium or some other, investment corporation is investing in Bitcoin, I don't know who's buying into Bitcoin, but they're not buying the traditional US bonds that used to be a pretty safe bet.
So yesterday, NVIDIA had their earnings call and they released their earnings. And they announced that they're buying back $60 billion worth of stock. NVIDIA is the most expensive stock. It's a $4.4 trillion company. It's the biggest stock on our stock exchange. And they're just buying more of their shares back to inflate the price of their shares. Like that's what we do in this country. Like we create more and devalue and it's just this is a good this kind of brings it all home right here. As we get ready to like close this thing down today. Boomers. Bitcoin isn't real money. Also boomers. Here's a piece of paper with George Washington's face on it that's being silently devalued by unelected bankers. That's money. Bitcoin is math. Math doesn't vote Democrat or Republican. And, it kind of like drives the point home that I was talking about earlier in regards to like people calling Bitcoin a scam or risky and Bitcoin's not money. It's like the dollars, money is just value. You're trying to trap value and you're trying to increase your value. We've been co-opted into believing that pieces of paper that's all money is. Money is just green pieces of paper, and you're trying to stack as much of that green piece of paper that you possibly can. When it should be, you're trying to stack buying power. And yes, we keep track in a nominal number value, which equates back to that dollar. But if you're only stacking just dollars, the actual dollars in cash, you're doing it all wrong. You need to find actual assets that tie their price to those dollars that outpace the buying power that you're getting from just holding dollars. Holding $100,000 cash and holding an asset that's worth $100,000 is not the same thing. People need to recognize and understand that. And people that are like, well, I don't want to put my money into something, it's risky. No, the risk is holding that $100,000 and doing nothing. That's the risk. There's nothing riskier than that. You're actually reducing risk by taking that and putting it into an asset.
And NVIDIA's in trouble anyway because like they're the chips and the AI and everything, and their biggest customer was China, and China's like, we're done buying your shit. We're gonna make it ourselves, because that's what we learned. Why should we pay tariffs on all blah blah blah? We're just gonna make our own stuff, and that is a problem for that company. Like that's a huge corporation, and they just lost essentially a big portion of their biggest customer, but it's just one of those things that's like, it just drives me crazy because people aren't paying attention, and I'm not claiming I understand 99% of this shit, but like I know that's bad. I know that's bad for our economy.
We'll end with this tweet here. We were born too late to explore the seas, too early to explore the stars, just right to fix the money. Bitcoin. Wrapping up episode 101. Again, RIP to Hal Finney, who passed away 11 years ago today, who was a very integral part of the early days of Bitcoin, who I believe personally was Satoshi. It's neither here nor there if he was or he wasn't. Thanks for watching the episode. Thanks for tuning in. Please like, please subscribe, please share. We are in a money revolution. That's what Bitcoin is. I'm one of the OG Bitcoiners. That's way more than just number goes up. I'm here for the revolution. As we always do, every single episode, don't trust, verify. Thanks for watching. See you next week.